All right, guys, he joins us every single Tuesday to help us break down all things Gamecocks football. Our good friend JC Shurburtt of the Big Spur, he joins the show once again. JC, appreciate you taking the time, my friend. How are you?
Doing good. It's another Tuesday. Gosh, the season just goes by so fast, Chris, when it starts. We sit here all year and wait on it. It's like slow as molasses. And then you wake up one day and next week's Thanksgiving. So I'm like, wow, but good to be talking ball. Good that the Gamecocks are still alive for postseason play. And we'll be very interested to see how they do these next two night home games. Carolina's a little bit different team when they play at home at night recently. So that gives you hope.
And JC, we're going to get into the Vandy game, the Kentucky game, of course, but I want to start on this note. In the SEC, Jimbo Fisher fired at Texas A&M. A day later, Zach Arnett fired at Mississippi State. Just your overall thoughts. It's, with the money involved and NIL and the portal and the increased expectation of winning, we're seeing that right now. The expectations are what they are at certain schools. Coaches already are getting the axe. Your immediate reaction or just thoughts to what's taken place in the SEC over the last couple of days?
I think there are football reasons both those guys failed. I think if you look at Jimbo Fisher since, since Jameis Winston, really, it's been mistake after mistake after mistake at quarterback recruiting. Either the guys don't do well under him, and then they go someplace else like Haynes King and play pretty well, or they're hurt, or there's always something. So his quarterback recruiting, to be a quarterback guru and to have put as many guys in the first round as he has, it's failed him. The second thing is the one question I had about Jimbo when he took that job. You're in the state of Texas, okay? You're at Texas A&M. The state of Texas, Chris, is full of, and it's been this way in the high school ranks since the 90s, spread. It's where the spread was born. All those high schools run spread. They do 7-on-7, 365 days a year. It's a very, and you look at the Big 12 schools and you wonder why they're all kind of spread. That's why, because they get most of their players out of Texas. So he goes in there with a pro-style offense. It's complicated. It's not easy to run. It's very similar to what they used to run at Alabama under Nussmeier and those guys. He did not evolve. Bobby Petrino could not save him. I thought that was sort of a reach going in and taking over a program that under Sumlin and Cliff Kingsbury, Johnny Manziel, all that had some success running spread. That's their recruiting base. That's what the kids that in that state are used to. I thought, well, they'll probably run into a wall on offense. Struggle inevitably, they'll struggle on offense, and they did. And then the defense was good at times, not so good at other times, to be as talented as they were. And then with his salary plus that number one recruiting class they signed a couple of years ago that they've spent a little bit of money on, they were the kind of the ringleaders with it. That increased expectations tenfold, along with a 9-1 season during the pandemic where they almost lost to Vanderbilt. It just. I had questions about it from the start, but if you want to know why Jimbo Fisher's fired, it's because he didn't score enough points, and that's the reason he didn't win enough games, because they couldn't score. So it was a mistake on his part, not understanding what he was walking into, not understanding the recruiting base, not understanding what he needed to do to put points on the board in the SEC in today's time. Zach Arnett on a much smaller scale, much lower salary, much shorter contract, very much smaller buyout. Same mistake. Mike Leach comes in and takes over for Joe Moorhead, who's a spread guy. They still had to retool the roster a bit, because they went from the big lumbering guy from California. They found Will Rogers on the roster, who obviously is a perfect Mike Leach quarterback. Shorter guy, boom, 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 like throwing darts down the field. So they lucked into him, found him. Still had to, revamp the receivers, get enough receivers. They were a little heavy at running back. They had to, make a lot of those guys transfer. They had to get their style going. Well, they finally were to the point where, yes, Arnett's defense was saving them. The Pirate was not lighting them up, but they were having games where it kind of looked like Leach again. That Auburn game a couple of years ago where they came back for 20 down and just kept chucking it all over them. Those kinds of games kept happening. They beat a bunch of top 25 teams. They surprised that they still owned A&M when Leach was there. And so you spend all this time through his 3 or 4 years building that, and then he tragically passes away. And then instead of sticking with that, when you know the type of quarterback Will Rogers is and the personnel you have, you try to reinvent the wheel and hire the guy from App State. And we all know from watching App State through the years, it's evolved into kind of a big heavy zone run team. And defensive guys make these mistakes. Okay, that we've seen it here, quite frankly. That they don't like coaching on the other side of the ball with an air raid. They just don't like it. So he was gonna, reinvent the wheel, and that wasn't necessary. And then they couldn't score points. Now, the caveat to all that is, I do think, who was he going to get to run the air raid? Well, Steve Spurrier Jr. in the bowl. I don't know if he was a candidate to take over or not, but so maybe he just wanted to go get his own guy because there was really nobody that could get in there and replace Leach. But I think they both made football mistakes, man, and that shows you, like, you sell out to a philosophy that does not fit. And you don't do the research and think about how it's not going to fit, or you're trying to play some sort of long play thinking eventually they'll get it. Chances are they won't. Chances are they won't. There's a reason South Carolina and a lot of the schools in the South, not named Georgia or Bama, don't just line up and run it at you, because there's not a lot of offensive linemen down there. It's your offensive linemen are up in the Midwest and Northeast and out West. Because all the good big guys play defense, right? So your big guys on offense that are on defense are really not that good. So that's why teams struggle on the O line, that and the defensive line competition. So it's it's one of those things where you have to understand where you are and what fits where you are. And I think with both of those situations, neither guy really did. And I know they're at both ends of the salary spectrum and buyout spectrum, but sometimes it's that simple. You just you don't get it. You're stubborn, and these guys are, and you get fired. Hard to feel. And Zach Arnett, I think, will end up head coach at San Diego State, or he'll go, because he's done this before. He'll go be, unfortunately, Lincoln Riley's defensive coordinator. Good luck with that. If you don't like spread, you don't like non-defensive teams, but he'll be fine, and he'll be back. With Jimbo, it's hard for me to feel sorry for somebody that's cashing a check for $75 million that was demonstrably underachieved at his job simply because he refused to adapt.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of justifying it, excuse me, JC, when you're one game worse than the guy, or a couple games worse than the guy that you replaced, and they paid a lot of money for you to replace. So change is imminent in college football. We're seeing that in the SEC. JC, let's get into the Gamecocks, what took place over the weekend. A 47-6 win over the Vanderbilt Commodores, now back-to-back wins for South Carolina, and it was really domination, JC, in all three phases: offensively, defensively, special teams. Carolina's defense even holding Vandy to 234 total yards, by far their best performance of the season. I kind of equated it, JC, to the Furman game early in the year, where it was a feel-good game. You had some young guys get into the ball game, have success. Of course, Lenoris Sellers with the rushing touchdown. I know we were talking about him off air. Your overall takeaways in this game? I think the biggest thing from this one is the building of momentum going into Kentucky and Clemson. Like, I don't know that you draw a bunch of new conclusions or learn a bunch of new things. Vanderbilt and Clark Lee, it's surprising to me how bad they are this year, but they are really that bad. But South Carolina did what they needed to do and took advantage, and a lot of guys shined on Saturday. Your biggest takeaways from that 41-point win over the Doors?
Yeah, you're right. And I'll talk about Vandy in a second, because I do have some things to say about that program. But, this is what you need. You talk about handling your business. You got to go handle your business. And they did. And even with like the weather, Chris, teams that aren't playing together, that are pouting, that are just wanting to play out the string and let the season get over, they're likely to just go out there and be like, sweat. I don't know. You get up 13-0 and you slosh around and win 19-7. The Gamecocks, quite frankly, left some points on the board. They struggled a little bit on offense with some drops in the first half, and then turned it on in the second. And, players like Josh Simon, breaking tackles. Mario Anderson, that tremendous touchdown run. I don't care who you're playing. That's awesome. Spencer Rattler getting on. Xavier Legette continuing to make big plays. Uh, that's a positive sign, no matter what the opponent is. And you remember last year too. South Carolina won 4 games in a row last season, and they had just gotten their tails kicked by Georgia badly when they turned around and played Charlotte. That was kind of a sloppy game they pulled away in the second half. Then they played SC State, a little bit more complete game. Well, then they went up to Kentucky and won. Now, granted, Kentucky didn't have Will Levis that night, but it was still a really good win for the Gamecocks. And they played really well. Probably that was their best defensive game they played, and it all culminated with a big win over at the Aggies. Speaking of A&M, the next Saturday. And so they've kind of been in this situation before where you have kind of 2 games you should win, the get right game, so to speak. Then it gets a little tougher, and then it gets a little tougher. So I think it's a positive sign as far as staying on script. And anytime you can play a bunch of guys, and anytime some guys that may have not had the best of seasons do things that are positive, like I think a touchdown reception for Omega Blake on the, what was that, a sail post corner? I don't know. Post corner, maybe? I don't know. Looked like a fade. I don't know. Whatever that route was, man. Big for him. His first touchdown, I think, since Furman. That was big for him. Keaton Nelson Jr. has had a tough year on defense. So for him to block the punt, scoop and score, that's big. I felt like punt block, the special teams unit, of all the special teams units, punt block was, I felt like they would get one pretty soon because they've been close the last couple of weeks. And I think that unit's coming along. If you're looking for a bright spot on the special teams, guys like that, Bradley Dudd, a walk on from Hammond, who probably now will have to be the 3rd-team running back, getting in there, getting 3 carries for 8 yards. That's big for a guy like that. Jamal Weiss recovering a fumble. That's big for him. Even guys like Colasardo, the walk-on linebacker, who I actually kind of like as a player, getting in there, making a tackle. I mean, all those. And so then your entire team feels good because the starters went out there and handled business, made big plays. They won going away. But then the other guys simply got to play and went out there, and some of them made some plays. And being a football player, you work all this time, and then you don't get to play on Saturdays. It can be deflating. But now the whole locker room's lifted up, and you have this togetherness, going into the most important game of the season at home at night at Williams-Brice. And I'll say this about Vandy. This is a side. People, I'm in the NIL space, and I said today, South Carolina's still behind. Need all the help they can get. However, I would not trade what South Carolina has for Vanderbilt in the world. They have 5% of whatever anybody else has. They don't support it. Their best player from last year, we'll see him at Williams-Brice this weekend. And it's not like the kid's from Kentucky and went home. He's from California and just went straight up 65 to Louisville and over 74 to Lexington. I mean, that's it. Not like he went to a good NIL situation. They can't even go identify and win because the minute they do that, the guys are gonna get rated. The academic standards there, it's tough to go to school there. And so some guys are just like, oh, well, it's here now, but now I'm going to go someplace else with a crowd. No, I mean the crowd, all that stuff. So Clark Lee is in a tough situation, especially with the SEC expanding, their academic stand, all this stuff. It is a brutal time to be a Commodore, and I say that just to tell our audience out there, the Gamecocks, that at least you're not Vandy. No matter how bad things have gotten, Carolina fans sometimes like, oh, we're looking at extinction, and we may as well just leave the SEC. I don't think that's a realistic conversation to have with South Carolina or anybody else, but Vanderbilt. I'd be curious to see what their little athletic board from their board of trustees has to say about all this, because it's getting worse, and there's no coach or anything out there to fix it with those guys. And that's probably the worst Vanderbilt team I've seen in a while. Good news is they played some other teams a lot closer than they played Carolina, so still a big win for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, JC, on that note, I was actually chatting with a guy, one of my good buddies that covers the Vanderbilt Commodores during that game, and he was sort of venting about, Chris, I cover the worst team in all of Power Five, and mentioning the NIL issues and how far they are behind. So you are definitely right. Perspective is a beautiful thing, and it can always be worse. Look to Nashville for that, which it's a shame. You feel like that program has a lot of potential. I mean, I was in Nashville for the summer first time. It's a great place. It's an awesome
Oh
city,
God.
but Andy just stinks. I mean, it's just
I lived there 7 years, man. It's once for 3 years, once for four. I would never go back because it's so crowded now. I mean, the skyline even looks different. The skyline looks like Houston, Texas now or something. I would never go back, but it was my favorite place to live when I've lived outside of the state by a mile. I mean, it is a fantastic people, fantastic scene. You just get a great vibe there. I mean, and then you can sell Nashville and their academics and all that to a certain extent. But I don't know how you're supposed to build a football program when your top 5 or 6 guys every single year just get the hell out of Dodge because you don't support NIL. They put all their NIL money in baseball.
Mm.
So there you go.
It's working for Tim Corbin, but that's about all they have working at this point. JC, the Kentucky Wildcats come to town. This is turning into somewhat of a really fun rivalry, right? I mean, we've got the Shane Beamer, Mark Stoops thing. Stoops was asked yesterday, does he have any disdain for Shane Beamer? And I looked at his answer and I'm like, that guy hates Shane Beamer. Like, I think it's known these two coaches don't like each other, right? Like, I mean, I'm not trying to put words in Shane Beamer's mouth, but he was asked over the spring about there's one coach on his schedule he wants to fight. And everybody's just kind of like, I think it's Mark Stoops. Like, I feel like that's fair to say that it's him. You look at this game though, JC. I mean, when you look at the ever evolving quote unquote rivalry that is South Carolina Kentucky, do you think there's something there? Do you think there's some beef with Beamer and Stoops there?
I don't know. I mean, I've never thought to find out. Just like a lot of people assume I know like what exactly happened to Jake Bentley's foot. And people know I know the Bentleys. I mean, never really pushed it. Never really found out for sure. So, and that's one of those things where I don't think I would ever ask Coach Beamer. Yeah, I wouldn't pursue it. That said, the sunglasses comment last year was like, where did that come from? If it didn't come from what he had seen on social media, and look, they don't beat South Carolina on very many recruits unless those recruits are from Kentucky, right? They come into the state, and I mean, they've even got a kid committed right now from Marion. South Carolina's probably going to flip them. They beat the Gamecocks 7 out of 9. Last year 7. It's got to be frustrating that not necessarily Coach Beamer, but the media still thinks in their mind that South Carolina's a better program, and that's because it is. Program. I don't know, because there's 3 things. There's job, program, team, right? Job, South Carolina's a much better job. That's not even up for debate. Program, there was probably some point in time where Kentucky did pass Carolina as a program. I think it's kind of back to even now. Team, we'll find out this year, right? That's you find out on the field how good of a team you've got. But it's got to be frustrating to go beat a team so many times in a row, and then just all the hype goes back on them. And so I get it. And I know that Coach Beamer brought those sunglasses with him to Lexington last year for a reason after they won. and then they made the comment about who would you fight? He's like, oh, there's a couple. And look, Shane Beamer seems like the nicest guy in the world, and he is to a certain extent. But he has enemies just like everybody else. He has people he's not fond of. And so is it Stoops? I don't know. Now you mentioned a rivalry, Chris. It's interesting because as it stands today, based on what the SEC is planning on doing today, and this could change tomorrow, this is the one team in the league Carolina's going to play every single year from here on out. There's no more Georgia, no more Tennessee, no more Florida, no more Vandy. Unfortunately, no more Mayor's Cup, no more whatever the hell they give for the Texas A&M game, which I guess is back in College Station now. This game, Kentucky and South Carolina are going to be permanent opponents and play every season. And I think they're permanent opponents in baseball too. They announced the other day. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of a budding rivalry. I think that Kentucky fans in football probably always see South Carolina as a game they should win, even when they were losing, lost 10 in a row. I think that Carolina fans still look at Kentucky and kind of say, well, that's a team they should beat, you know. But they still look at Missouri that way too, and they've lost 5 in that one. So, but I look at it. I do think they're going to be fired up, and there has been something about South Carolina every single year where Stoops has just coached his best game. They've played their best game. Going all the way back to like his first season where they didn't win an SEC game, Chris, if you remember, I think Spurrier and company had them down about 35-7. They came back with that team, which was a bad football team, and cut it to 35-28 at the end. I mean, they gave them all they wanted. The next year up in Lexington, Carolina blew a 2-touchdown lead. The next year, Kentucky's up 17 at half. Gamecocks couldn't put in Perry Orth. They couldn't close the deal. The next year was that 17-10 thing up in Lexington where nobody wanted to score, where Stoops was on the hot seat. That was 16. The 17 game took every bit of my soul away. And now that I think about it, the Florida game this year killed me, but that game still is the worst because Carolina's 2-0, 2 road wins. Things are going great. You get a Debo touchdown and then a pick first two plays of the game. It's a blackout. Carolina's rolling. Like they're going to roll to 3-0. And then Kentucky just got them. I mean, it goes on, and Jake Bentley couldn't hit the broadside of a barn all of a sudden in 2018. Worst game he's ever played. And guys running over and that was crazy because that 2018 game, BMAC was the OC, Chris. South Carolina had the exact same game plan on for Kentucky that they did for Clemson. Mm-hmm. The difference is all those long shots they connected against Clemson and had 500 yards passing. Couldn't hit the broadside of a barn against Kentucky. Shane's first year, my God, they fumbled 4 or 5 times, and the evil genius couldn't dial up anything that worked, right? So 16-10 loss. So it's just been a lot of frustration in these games. The Stoops just seems to have their number. But I'll say this, Carolina wins this one. It's 3 out of the last 5 for the Gamecocks, and so it's a very nice turning point. And you never know what's going to happen with some of these coaching openings and things like that in terms of what's the future hold up in Lexington.
And JC, it feels like a pair of teams that are sort of heading in opposite directions, right? South Carolina has won their last 2. Kentucky's lost 4 of their last 5. I think it's safe to say the Wildcats have been a bit underwhelming to preseason expectations, especially Devin Leary at quarterback. He's came on the last couple weeks, but has not been the guy most folks expected. But to your point, JC, they do have Ray Davis at the running back position. They've got Berrigan Brown, Dane Key at wide receiver. They love to run the football. Again, like I mentioned, Devin Leary is taking some positive steps forward. They actually did some positive things offensively in that game against Alabama last weekend where they got beat down. Defensively, been good stopping the run, but JC, the opportunities are going to be there for Spencer Rattler, Xavier Legette. Kentucky allows 241 yards per game passing. They do have 23 sacks as a defense. And JC, when you look at a game like this, you got to look at external factors. You got to look at I'm losing the word I'm looking for, but you've got to look at everything, the big picture. Everybody talks about Cocktober, but it's really the month of November and this time of year when Shane Beamer's teams cut it on. 7:30 kickoff, under the lights, Williams-Brice Stadium. How many points is that worth? We shall see. So when you look at this matchup as a whole, Kentucky favored in the ball game. Does that surprise you? And overall, just like, how do you look at this game? I think this is a really fun coin flip type of SEC game here.
Yeah, I looked at the line lately. I know on Sunday some people had it as a pick 'em, so doesn't shock me completely that Kentucky would be favored. I think, you crunch the numbers and all, you think, well, Kentucky can come in and catch the Gamecocks, and they're a spider web football team, right? Josh Pate taught me that term. Of course, I've taught Josh a couple terms too that he likes to use. So, and what you have to do is you got to avoid getting in their spider web. You got to go attack. You got to make them play at your pace. And when I say pace, I'm not necessarily talking about tempo on offense or blitzing on defense. I'm talking about like the overall pace and feel of the game. You got to dictate to them. You don't let them grind it out on you. You can't go 3 and out. You can't give them momentum. You can't let the crowd get quiet. They love that. They'll chew you up if that's the case. They did it to Mississippi State a couple of weeks ago. But I'll remind everybody that Mississippi State win from them. Mississippi State was starting Mike Wright, who I think was hobbled a little bit. And then Marks, their running back, did not play. So they had no offense. Mississippi State had 0 offense in that game and lost 24-3. But they have struggled. And Kentucky's record, in large part, with the exception of that Florida win, where the running back just went nuts. They really haven't beaten a whole lot of good teams, and they really haven't played in a whole lot of tough environments. Starkville certainly was in the, they kind of seized momentum at about halftime, and it got quiet. Georgia, best environment they've been in all year by a mile, they got smacked down. Other than that, their road games have been Vandy, and I think that's it. Vandy, Mississippi State, and Georgia. Other than that, they've been at home. Mm-hmm. So, and they played a couple of cupcakes early in the year. So, they haven't been really tested in this environment since their trip to Athens. And they got 2 back-to-back because Louisville, they've beaten Louisville pretty good a few times in a row. And Louisville's got a good team and with Jeff Brom in town. So they got to go to Louisville the following week. So it's not going to be they're already in a bowl, but it's not going to be the easiest of finishes, I think, for the Wildcats environment-wise.
And JC, look at this one. Am I wrong to feel like this is a game where South Carolina is going to have to outscore the opponent? Because I know Kentucky's had their struggles. I know we saw the defense last week have success, but granted, it was Vanderbilt. I mean, we saw Jacksonville State go up and down the field. I mean, is it fair to think that you're going to need another really, really big performance from Spencer Rattler, Leggett, Mario Anderson to win this one? I feel like the over, taking it back to the gambling side, I feel like the over 54.5 is almost free money here because I think it's got to be a 34-30, 38-35. Like I look at that Kentucky offense. They haven't been great by any means, but they've got the weapons, I think, to give a South Carolina defense that struggled all year some serious headaches.
I think so. I mean, I think the key, obviously, Chris, is you can't let them get balanced on you. I mean, like, okay, so if Davis is running, he's a guy that gets his. It's kind of like last year. Rodriguez got his, but Kentucky couldn't throw the ball. Like, it became very one-dimensional. Carolina did a good job getting them and passing downs and applying pressure. That's the key here. I think Leary has gotten better the last couple of weeks. They do have weapons. But I also think South Carolina, kind of their niche on defense when they've been good is applying pressure. Leary, before ever since the Clemson game at Memorial Stadium last year, because Carolina was off that week and I had a Clemson buddy in town and we went and watched that. He's hadn't been the same, and he struggled mightily this year. Had some good flashy moments, but honestly, I think that's the key. If they start putting it in Leary's hands with the way Carolina's kind of gotten a little more creative, putting pressure on the quarterback, Bam Martin Scott's a guy that's come on, they're blitzing Debo. They're going to score their share of points, but Carolina, I think, can get home enough and maybe force some mistakes to where it's beneficial to them. But, on the other side of the ball, South Carolina has to score points. I mean, you can't go out there and hang 17 on the board and, get sacked 8 times and expect to win this one because you absolutely will not. You got to have your normal home game offensive showing like you have all year, and go from there.
Yeah, the good news is, JC, if it's a battle of quarterback play, Spencer Rattler at Williams-Brice Stadium, I'm not sure there are many that would go against him the way he's played at the friendly confines this season. JC, one last thing, and I'll get you out of here. I've gotten a lot of questions in regards to recruiting on the defensive line. South Carolina right now, I believe, with only one defensive end or edge player. Again, just been getting a lot of questions. What's the latest on that? And do you expect South Carolina to go heavy in the portal in regards to the defensive line? Are there some guys out there you expecting to land? Like, what's the latest on recruiting that position, which is obviously a position of need?
Well, Dylan Stewart, he's so like some guys are like 5-star defensive linemen, Chris, and you look at them and you go, well, they're still going to have to be coached up a little bit. Jadeveon Clowney was not really one of those, but he was behind Cliff Matthews and some good players. So obviously, our friend Coach Lawing brought him along slowly, but still by the second game of his freshman year, he's shaking Aaron Murray loose and doing Clowney things, right? So there's very few Clowneys or Miles Garrett or somebody like that. Most of your taller, rangier DNs are guys with with upside, like Devin Taylor. They need a year. Desmond Umeozulu is a guy like that. He's going to be really, really good, but it's going to take a year. Or they're these shorter guys, kind of like Xavier Thomas when he came out that played for Clemson, had he not gotten hurt and all that. That he kind of is what he is. There's not a big ceiling there, but yeah, he can go in because he's 270 or whatever and play early. There's not a lot of in between. Dylan is sort of an in between guy because he's 6'4", 240. He can play linebacker, so he's got great feet, great instincts, but he's also good enough and talented enough to start right away. So he's going to start. I have no doubt in my mind, if Dylan Stewart's healthy and all goes according to plan, he'll be a starter. So I wanted to make clear that's one guy, but that's a big guy. The rest of it, you got kind of two things you need to look at. Cameron Fountain, the defensive end from Atlanta, who's committed to Southern Cal. I think the Gamecocks have a good shot at flipping him. I think Alex Grinch being gone, it's all the way across the country. He's visited several times. He loves South Carolina. I'm not going to say it's a foregone conclusion because another school, there could be a third party or something that sneaks in. But that's your other guy. That's two top 10 defensive ends out of high school. Plus, you got me a Zulu back. You got JT Gear back. Gear back. And then Montague Rames, it's going to be up to the school to let him back in. But, I mean, the door's not completely closed on him coming back. Tackle is the spot where they're going to have to be heavy portal. That's not to say they won't take it in because they absolutely would. But I think you're two or three guys JUCO portal on the interior this year for Travian Robertson as he kind of tries to, boost the DNA of that room a little bit.
There you have it. JC Shurburtt of the Big Spur, who joins us every single Tuesday. JC is always my friend. I appreciate you taking the time. We'll do it again next week.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Be good.